Today I'm going to show how to cut out and measure the cardboard for a pressing pad for a Zenith or Alpine trimmer. I will be making a 5 1/4 by 7 9/16 inch pad, so the cardboard will have to be a little larger than that. The theory behind it is you have your untrimmed book. Your cardboard cannot be longer or wider than your untrimmed book. If it is actually longer, when your joggers come in to cut it out, they will actually hit the cardboard and not allow you to position it properly. Or if it's too long, your brush will push it back into the backstops. This process will work for any size pad we need, but for today I will be making the 5 1/4 by 7 9/16. If you are making a different size, you just have to change your base measurement before adding your trim offs. When you measure for your pad, you can either measure from the legs up to where the front knife is, or you can measure from where the front knife is back to the legs. What I normally go by, if I have a real nice smooth edge and all the cardboard lined up and it's real nice and pretty, I will normally measure from the legs up to where the front knife is. Since I'm doing a 5 1/4 inch pad, I will measure up 5 1/4 inches right here, and I will put a dashed line there because I don't want to cut there. I just need to know where the front knife is going to be. Okay, now that I know where the front knife is going to be, and we need to trim some off the front of the pad, I will give it about 1/8 of an inch, maybe a little more, and draw a line. This is the actual line I want to cut out my pad on. Because if I cut out my pad on that, when I go to cut it out, the plate will be there, and I will be left with about 1/8 inch to trim off, which will give you a nice clean edge. On the width of your cardboard, we are going 7 9/16 inches, which would be about here, and we want about 1/8 inch on each side. So when you trim it out, you have 1/8 inch on the foot and 1/8 inch on the head, and you'll have 1/8 inch on the face. That's what this first line was. So that will 7 9/16, 1/8 and 1/8, that's 1/4. 7 9/16 plus 1/4, it is a little more than 7 3/4. I'll go 7 7/8. And I will draw my line here. So if I'm 7 7/8, that should be about the size of my untrimmed book. And as you can tell, it is just a little bit smaller, and that is what you want. And on the face, the actual knife is going to cut back here into bleed a little bit, and that will work good. You really don't want the brush pushing your cardboard in, because the brush pushes the cardboard in, it'll force it against the backstops, and the backstops will probably damage it as it runs. So now that we know the overall size, we will take our plate, we will line up the front edge on our front knife mark, and then you kind of guess or estimate this side versus, you just want to get it close to centered. If it is not centered, it's not the end of the world, because your trimmer is going to cut it anyway, and if it's off just a little bit, it won't make a difference. So once you lay your plate on there, trace out your cutout, extend your lines, And if you cut on all the solid lines, you should have a piece of pad that is the proper size. You notice I did not put any tape on this cardboard yet. I have found the tape is a little hard on the saw blades. It kind of gums them up. So I normally wait till I get done with all my cutting before I apply the tape. And here's one final look at our pad before we cut it out on the bandsaw. Since you cut this pad out in the trimmer, and a side knife is going to cut right about here, and a side knife is going to cut right about here, and your front knife is going to cut right about here, if you measure from the back of the legs, you don't have to be real accurate with these cuts, because as long as you're close, the trimmer will clean them up for you. But the bottom of the legs, they have to be smooth to start with in order to measure from there. Okay, the other way of measuring out a pad is to measure from where the front knife is going to cut. Let's say you have a piece of cardboard and your cardboard, the edges just don't line up. It really didn't glue together good. You can always start measuring from that end. And what you would do is start off by figuring out where your front knife is, because that nasty stuff, just have the front knife trim that off. So you'll make a dashed line from where your front knife is going to cut the pad out, and then you just measure how long you need your legs. So since we are doing a 5 1/4 by 7 9/16, we'll put that on where the front knife is going to cut. And then we got 5 1/4, 5 1/4. And you'll draw your lines. And like I said, instead of cutting up here, you're going to cut back here. So if this does not look good, after you do a cut with the saw, you should have a nice smooth cut. So we have the 5 1/4 inch marked. It's from where the knife cuts to the back of the legs, which we are going to cut on the bandsaw. And then we need the width. And we determined before the width is about 7 7/8. About here. Okay. So we have the overall size mark. We're going to cut off the leg side. We're going to cut off the other side. So you take your metal plate Again, you line it up to where the front knife is going to cut. Kind of guess on your sides. Get them about even. Say if you're off a little bit, it won't hurt. Mark your cutout. Okay, so we need to cut our cutout out. We need to cut the leg side this time. And then we need to cut it down to size here. And when you go to cut it out in the trimmer knife should cut right inside that line, right inside that edge, and about on the dotted line. So I will just cut this one out right away. Okay, I have both pads here that I just cut out, and I'll show you the difference in the two measuring styles. In the first one, we used our factory edge or our glued up edge as a reference point, and therefore when we cut these out, we didn't have to be real particular because the trimmer is going to clean up that side, that side, that side, and we decided that side looked good to start. That's why we did it that way. On the second one we did, we measured from the front and went backwards because we really didn't like the edge back here. You really want something smooth and solid, and we didn't have that. So we had to be, we didn't have to cut the front. The sides we didn't have to be that picky, but whenever we cut the legs, you had to have a pretty steady hand because you're trying to make a straight edge. If you don't cut smooth, you're really not going to gain much if you get some crooked cuts. That's why I always prefer to use a factory edge, but if it's not there, it's not there, and you do have an option, or else you can just cut it straight, give yourself a flat edge, and then measure the other way. It's whatever works. You know, there's really no right way and wrong way to measure. Those are just the two ways that I do it. And like I say, your goal is to be just a little smaller than your untrimmed book. And just so you can see how much is going to be taken off of there, put a trim book there, and you're going to take off about an 1/8 inch on each side and about an 1/8 inch on the face. I'm not going to cut this out, but I'll show you. Everything I've showed has been for 5 1/4 by 7 9/16. If I were to make a 6 by 9 pad, say we're about 10 inches wide here, so it'd be plenty wide. The way I would do that, actually I always prefer to measure from the legs. So we're going to go up, we want 6 by 9, so we will go up 6 inches. And the 6 inches is not where we're going to cut it. That is where the front knife should actually impact on a 6 by 9 book. So you want to leave about an 1/8 inch for the trimmer to trim off. That's why I draw a dashed line. I don't want to cut that. That's just where the reference point for the front knife. Come up about an 1/8 inch, draw a solid line, and that is where I want to cut it. So my 6 inch pad is actually going to be a little more than 6 1/8 inches long. And then on the 9 inch, okay, we have 9 inches here. Said you want to leave at least an 1/8 on each side, so always add a 1/4, or actually add a big 1/4, probably closer to 9 3/8. Depending on the size of your untrimmed book, you can actually leave a little more, or if you're not really trimming much off, as on these you're only taking a little bit off the head and a little bit off the foot, you have to stay a little closer. I always go an 1/8 inch on these, but if I'm doing a chop fold work, I will go a little bigger because our signatures are actually larger and I'm not exceeding the size of an untrimmed book. So this here is about 9 3/8, and okay, that is going to be the overall size. I will cut on that line and I will cut on that line. Now, you do not need the actual plate that you are going to use, because this cutout is for the outfeed belts of the trimmer, and regardless of which plate you use, the outfeed belt stays the same size. Therefore, you can trace the cutout the same size. You can use any plate for that trimmer to actually measure the cutout. And again, I line up the front edge on my dashed line where the front knife is going to cut. Try to center it. Say no need to measure it, just get her fairly close. Trace. And extend the lines, and you're ready to cut. You'd cut on the solid lines, and like I say, when you actually trim it out in a trimmer, you'd trim it right inside there, right inside there. If you're actually doing a larger chop fold job, like a 10 inch or 10 7/8, just turn your cardboard sideways, and like I say, it's plenty long, and it'd be the same principle. Say if doing 8 3/8, you just measure up from the back of your leg, 8 3/8, back of leg, 8 3/8, dashed line, because that's where your front knife is going to cut. Move it up about 1/8 of an inch, or give or take 1/8 of an inch. That is where you want to cut it out. And then we said 10 7/8. I go a little above 11 1/4. We'll go about 11 1/4. I mean, check it against a untrimmed book. If your untrimmed book is longer than the cardboard, there'd be no need to cut that off. And after you get your overall measurements, same thing, like I say, all the outfeed cutouts are the same. So you can take any plate for that trimmer, line it up on the mark, trace it out, extend your lines. And that is all there is to it.